Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who like their stories reeking of formaldehyde. Right now we are reading every short story in Ann and Jeff VanderMeer's The Weird anthology, including this one, Georg Heym's The Dissection. I'm Zach, and this week I'm really interested in what makes this weird. It's undoubtedly weird, but what is the exact mechanism through which the weirdness comes?
Undoubtedly weird. I'm Bob, and I'm interested in the neopathetic cabaret, but I'm also interested in the blend of beauty and then also horrible grotesquerie, disgusting things happening with this bloated, soggy, dripping, oozy body. This is great, Zach. I thought this was fantastic. What did you think about this?
Yeah, loved it. Man had an idea. Man had a concept, and he went right through with it. Immediately, what came to mind for me was Dan Simmons' novel Song of Kali, where I believe there was equally florid descriptions of corpses. I believe in that one floating down the Ganges River. This time, it's the same idea. We're writing about the body. We're writing about the dead body. And we are really going heavy with the adjectives to describe it in a way that, if it was of a different subject matter, we would say, oh, this is romantic poetry. If this was nature writing, it would be, effusive and romantic.
I would say this is effusive and romantic. His body resembled the iridescent calyx of some gigantic flower, a mysterious plant from Indian primeval forests that someone had shyly laid at the altar of death. Splendid reds and blues sprouted down his limbs, and in the heat, the large wound under his navel. Anyway, it keeps going, gets more and more disgusting. Georg Heym is really beloved in Austria and Germany, and there are tons and tons of discussions about him on YouTube in German, and there is nothing in English. It is very hard to find anything about him, but there is tons, heaps and heaps and heaps of information in German. I wish that I think this is one of the stories that the VanderMeers went and had translated. I can't remember if that's exactly true, but they had a hand in translating a lot of the stories in the Weird, and I wish more of Heym was being translated or that he was being talked more about in English.
Yeah, and actually, if readers are interested, you can actually find a really interesting essay by the translator of this story talking about his choices that he made while translating it. Definitely worth reading. It's out there. Just search his name. You'll find it. It's really interesting that he's so popular in Germany and Austria. I have not heard of this author before. I am really, really interested in reading more. I mean, I feel like if I had found this guy in freshman year of college, I would have just made him my whole identity,
I think he has that feeling. So he died at 24. I think around the time Keats died too, around the same age. He died at 24, and the VanderMeers describe him of believing in a demon city. I'm not exactly sure what it means, but I think it's about his involvement with the neopathetic cabaret. Have you ever heard of this organization? Because I wish we had been a part of it. Okay. So it's around for 4 years, 1910 to 1914. It's all of these poets, and they invite Georg Heym to come and speak when he's, I think, 22 or 23. And it's the first time he reads in public, and they all say, wow. But they were such a cool organization, a very strange organization, where they would have, I think they did 9 performances, and they would have poets, they would have philosophers, they would come and speak to each other, and they were really interested in 4 main writers. They really loved Nietzsche, they loved Freud, they loved Rimbaud, and they loved Mikhail Bakunin. They loved the quote that he says, "The desire to destroy is at the same time a creative desire." And so the guy who's kind of getting this all going is Erwin Lowenson, and he wrote that the contemporary is a comfortable being, fearful of genius and affection, a sick person in need of revitalization. So they used these 4 main speakers, debated them, and then had their own poetry, their own philosophy and discussion. And they said they were doing this as a therapy for the contemporary being, a therapeutic revolt to try and wake people up. And they, by doing that, they wrote lots of corpse poetry. Pretty cool.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was surprised to hear that Bakunin, anarchist thinker, and Nietzsche, I guess you could say anti-nihilist thinker, proto-existentialist, some might say, were top of their reading lists. This thing really reminded me most of all of Baudelaire's poem from The Flowers of Evil, where he's basically describing a body in a field. Because it's so efflusive. It's so florid and descriptive. And he does all of these, I don't want to say poetic tricks, but it is extraordinarily poetic and visual too. He relies on color descriptions, most of all, setting the scene with white, white sheets, white walls. The doctors are wearing white, but then you have the red and the blue running down the arm and the yellow of the piss and, things like that. Anyways, I'm kind of rambling on about this, but I'm surprised to learn that those are the authors that his you call them the pathetic crew? Neo-pathetic crew.
Yeah, they're the neo-pathetic crews, the new pathetic cabaret.
I guess something that I was really wondering is, it obviously has style. No one can say that this doesn't have style. Do you think it has substance?
I think it has substance. One, I think it's very fun to read and it's worth the reading. But I think there's something weird about it that is similar to the last Myrink's story, where we had this spectacle and we had a terrible thing happening on stage while all of these beautiful things are happening around it, and then no one really knows what to do about it. Here we have this. I mean, it's very graphic, and these doctors come and they're just prodding and pulling and cutting and doing all of these things to this body. But meanwhile, they seem totally indifferent to what they're doing. The poet seems to be obsessed with the beauty of whatever is happening on. And then the body itself is also dreaming. So it's like everything is kind of one click off. There's these three main perspectives, and all of them are off from what they should be. The body is having these beautiful dreams about his old life and his old romance. And I feel for us as the readers, it's interesting to see everyone. We're like seeing the backs of all these characters. It's not really how you would expect them. You don't expect to see a body like this. You don't expect to see doctors behaving around it like this. And you don't expect the narrator to treat it like this.
I think you're right. And yet, I think that the only reason we feel like that is because the person still seems to be conscious. Not conscious, but aware. Maybe that's a better word. Aware rather than conscious. Because it's not like the body, is like looking down and watching them cut them open and being like, it hurts. There's no pain. There's no care about anything. But there is a kind of slipping between like awareness between what's going on and dreaming, like reminiscing about happy memories. And yeah, and it's playful in that sense. Like, it talks about how the decay pulled apart the mouth of the dead man and he seemed to smile. So it's like, it's not that he was smiling. It's that the decay made him look as if he was smiling. But then the author gives us all of these dreams of fragrant summer evenings and brief kisses, as though, we get this window into what that smile could mean. It's very playful, actually, surprisingly playful.
I feel like it's a big part of weird fiction, too. In the introduction, we kind of saw not exactly a touch between the two, but there's not a parallel either. There's something going on with a feeling of science fiction, but more of a horror atmosphere and a horror story. But there's some kind of spirit of science fiction in some of these weird stories. And I wonder that might be the philosophical edge of this, of thinking, okay, what actually happens when you are dead? Is your brain processing any memories, or is it totally shut off? Is there something that we just can't see? What if this body is totally unaware of what's going on, but it is still living in the sense of its memories, at least for a short period of time, until it is just turned back into soil? I think that maybe weird fiction is interested in asking certain questions like that other stories aren't asking. What is the experience of being dead while still having memories?
Yeah. And, as I was reading this, I was like, oh, okay. So like the weirdness of this is kind of like, an out of body experience. It's kind of like, what is it like being dead, but then your consciousness is actually not tied to your physical form. So you can watch all of these things happen to you. And, you know, the interesting thing about that consciousness of the narrator voice, of the narratorial voice, is that it doesn't have any value judgments about anything. Everything is vivid and beautiful and hyper detailed, but there's no good or bad that they're like, you know, removing organs from this body or the state of the narrator's form or body. You know, there's no like, oh, I wish this didn't happen to me. I can't believe I died. You know, it's just kind of laid out and presented. And yet this would make you think that the author has this idea that maybe consciousness actually exists independently of the brain, independently of the body. But then we get this final line, which I thought was so interesting. He's in his dreams and he gets his line of dialogue. I will see you again every evening in the hour of dawn. We will never part. How I love you. Should I tell you how I love you? And the dead man quivered in happiness on his white death table, while the iron chisels in the hands of the doctors broke up the bones of his temple. And the finality of that line makes you think that, oh, actually, that's the end. That's the real end of the narrator, the breaking up of the temple, the destruction of the brain. So it's not quite as body independent as the rest of the story might suggest.
It is kind of a thinking about, okay, what can the brain still do when it's deprived of oxygen? Does it have anything still ticking inside? But it's also sad. You know, he's going to tell the person that he loves them. And we don't find out, but maybe that means that is the final memory up until this point. You know, going to tell the person and you die before. It's a lost opportunity. So while it is beautiful, there's also a sadness to the end of it.
I like that idea that it's a person's final memory. I just had a flashback to Wild Wild West, classic. You know, where they say, oh, the dead man's final image is imprinted on his eyeballs, is burned into his retinas, and they shine light through it like it's a slideshow. Maybe it's the same way with the dead man's final memories.
Everything comes back to Wild Wild West.
Underrated.
One other thing, I don't know if this is a necessary connection to really make note of, but at least in these early stories that we're reading in The Weird, a lot of the writers have connections to different occult organizations or interests in different kinds of occult. And I thought this was interesting that he had a dream. Heym had a dream when he's a few years before he dies. What is it? Maybe 5 years before he dies, about drowning. And then he and his friend, they go out ice skating on a skating rink, and his friend slips in. Heym jumps in to try and save him, but his friend sinks to the bottom, seems to be dead. Heym then struggles in the broken ice in the water for 30 minutes, calling for help and people trying to save him, and no one can save him. He just slips down through the ice. It's interesting that he had this kind of premonition of dying from drowning, and then shortly thereafter died from drowning.
Oh my God. I think that
tough way to go.
Every single one of these stories, we need to be looking up what the author's relationship to the occult is. I think this is the real thread that I want to follow through this anthology. I love the idea that, our last story, the guy was definitely into like 19th century spiritualism. This guy is having premonitions of his own death. Let's see where this path follows.
Let's join some societies. I think we go whole hog, Zach.
I'm in.
Souls for sale. Souls for sale.
Bob, I am so in. And listeners, if you have any invites for us, for your secret society, please let us know. Black masses, sacrifices, or even just a good group of people pulling the strings of global politics. We are here. We are ready to join. I'll talk to you later, Bob.
Talk to you later, Zach. I don't know if we should say we want to join a sacrifice.